Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about different ways of shading. So there are different ways you can go about doing your shading. I'm going to use a 4B pencil just to demonstrate this to you. There's a thing called cross-hatching. And what cross-hatching is, first of all you get your pencil, you hold it like you would normally with biro, but you hold it further up so it's nice and loose. And you do lines going in one direction, and then you go over it with lines going in a different direction. And the more lines you add, and from the different angles, the darker the patch eventually becomes. So I'm not leaning heavier on my pencil as I go. It's just the fact that the lines are overlapping and creating the illusion of darkness. So that's called cross-hatching. So when you're cross-hatching, don't do this, because it doesn't really lead to a very dynamic drawing. You can, but it just makes the drawing take too long. So hold the pencil further up and flick the pencil. Flick, 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 flick. So as you can see, the more lines I add to any one place, the darker it gets. So the tip of the pencil is hitting up the page, creating those lines. So that's cross-hatching. So scribble hatching is the same principle, but instead of doing straight lines, it's like you've got the shakes. So you do scribbles, little scribbles. Again, I'm holding my pencil further back, just allowing the end of it to rest on my hand there. You can do scribbles. And the more scribbles you place on top of each other, the darker that area eventually becomes. So again, I'm not leaning harder on the dark parts, I'm just adding more and more lines. This takes more time, but it creates a more interesting drawing. And this particular type of shading in is good for things like fur or for trees that are off in a distance if you were doing a landscape. So another type of scribble hatching is called circle hatching. And this is basically where you do lots of little circles. Keeping it nice and fluid. Again, my pencil, I'm keeping it nice and loose. And basically, wherever you go over it more, it becomes darker eventually. Again, it's not about leaning heavier on the pencil, it's about building it up. This gives you a more 3D image that's not so smudgy. Okay, so that's cross-hatching, scribble hatching, like you've got the shakes, and circle hatching, lots of little overlapping circles. Now, another way you can do shading is if you use the edge of the lead. So rather than the point of the lead, which is what we've been using all along, now we're going to make sure that the lead of the pencil is in contact with the paper. To do that, you have to hold the pencil in a different way than you've been doing already. So you put the pencil into your palm of your hand like this. This is called the overhand grip. And then you put your thumb on the back of the pencil, curl these other fingers around, and your index finger is on the top like this. And what that allows you to do, it allows you to get the edge of the lead in contact with the paper. So you get a nice soft line. And with this, you can lean a little heavier to get the darker parts. Now I'm going to just point out that there's little bits and pieces of dust under my paper and it's causing those marks. So it's always a good idea to have the second page underneath your drawing and wipe off your table to make sure there's no bits and pieces underneath that can cause those marks. So we'll keep going. And I can use it a bit like cross-hatching. The more I go over it, the darker it becomes, or I could lean heavier. The only thing about leaning heavier is, yes, you do get a darker mark, but sometimes it gets a bit shiny and it kind of can ruin the picture on you, so just be careful with that. So this is with the 4B pencil. I'm going to try the same again with the 6B pencil just to show you the difference. So again, pencil into my hand, index finger on the back side of the pencil, curl, put my thumb on top of the pencil and curl my fingers around. So now this is a 6B pencil. Again, there's a few bits and pieces under my page. Make sure your surface is nice and clean. And you can see, because the 6B pencil is softer than the 4B pencil, you can get a darker mark. So that's a 6B pencil. If we were to do it with a 2B pencil, you can see it takes longer to build up that shadow, and the pencil isn't as soft. You're getting more of a line rather than a soft kind of effect. So this is why we have different grades of pencil. So you can see it's quite hard to build up a dark tone using the 2B pencil, but it's good for mid-tones and light tones. Okay, another thing you can do, people sometimes use their finger to blend, but I wouldn't recommend it because the oils in your finger will cause that to become very shiny, and it just flattens your drawing. Another little tip is when you're shading, so that you don't get black all over the side of your hand, is to put a page down over the part that you're leaning across. And you can get some kitchen towel or tissue, or if you had it, a cotton bud, and you can blend. I'm going to move this so you can see what I'm doing. So the advantage of this is it makes a lovely soft tone that you can also go over again. The disadvantage is it can get very blurry, so you have to be very careful with this. And I would recommend usually starting with the lighter part and blending into the darker. You don't have to use a tissue when you're using this form of shading. This is just a suggestion. In fact, I'd recommend not using it too much because it flattens your picture. Just be careful when you're using this. Okay, and let's try the 2B. You'll notice the 2B is harder to blend because it's not as soft or as dark as the 6B or the 4B pencil. But it does blend to a certain extent. And then you can always come back in and use your rubber to rub out highlights. Let's say this was a circle. It was dark here. You can use your rubber then to rub out the highlights. Okay, so just to recap, we're talking about shading. There's different types of shading. These are just some of them. There's a thing called cross-hatching, where you build up your lines. And the more lines you put, the darker the object becomes. This can be nice for perhaps cloth, for example, when you're drawing. Scribble hatching, like cross hatching, but you've got the shakes. And circle hatching is where you just do continuous circles and build them up that way. Then there's kind of like the what's called the plane or smudge, that's what I call it, technique. And this is if you want a softer kind of shade that blends more easily from light tone into dark tone without any lines and things. I think it's nice in a drawing to do a combination of a few of these types of shading because it makes for a more dynamic, interesting drawing. So go away and practice that, and we'll move on to shading the teapot next. Good luck. Enjoy.